Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us for our first session of the Microsoft 365 Meetup for Government group. We're very excited to have everyone and very excited about this community and some of the various content and learning that we can all share and continuing to network and all of us who are interested in both Microsoft 365 Cloud as well as the public sector and government space. So just by way of a brief introduction, my name's Nick Giard. I'm a technical specialist with Microsoft. So I focus on Office 365 and the modern workplace cloud and all the technical aspects of that. So feel free to follow me on any social media. I'm not going to talk about myself a lot, but just for anyone who hasn't met me, wanted to provide a little bit of context. For the session tonight, we've got a very exciting presentation, and we're going to be spending a few minutes just some administrative and introductory content, since this is one of our first sessions for this group. So thank you everybody who is joining us tonight. We're then going to have the presentation. And then after, I'm not sure, I'll let Steve and Mark speak to if they want to save questions for the end or how they want to handle that. But then we have some time built in for some kind of open Q&A, whether it be related to the presentation or just about the community in general. And then we'll kind of close out and wrap up. And we have a number of other exciting sessions that are being scheduled for the coming weeks. So definitely please take a look at the calendar within the meetup group and RSVP to those if there's something that interests you. And we'll be continuing to add content. The goal is to be doing, at least for the next 3 months, a session planned every other week for the, I'd say, the next 90 days, and then we'll evaluate how often and what topics people are interested in. So we definitely value everyone's feedback to make sure that this is really meeting the needs of the community, and the intention for this is really to be a community effort. So one of the things we want to talk about, and kind of like I mentioned, this is really supposed to be a community kind of for and of practitioners, users, both industry as well as government leaders, anyone who really has an interest in Microsoft 365 and the Microsoft Cloud, as well as applications within the public sector and government space. So all are welcome, and we definitely, want to continue to drive a lot of activity and networking, as well as ensure that as we go forward, while organizations like Microsoft are helping to sponsor this community, that it really is kind of a self-directed community effort and meeting the needs of that community. We have a few community standards we want to be everyone to be aware of. The most important of which is be respectful, be considerate, right? There are many scenarios where people may have different opinions or passions or ideas. So this is a forum where, while we certainly want everyone to feel open and able to contribute and speak, just definitely treat others as you would like to be treated. Please do not share anything that is proprietary or sensitive or confidential unless you're authorized to do so. But this is really probably not the forum for that sort of information. We do want this to be a space where people can interchange, whether it be somebody who's looking for a job, looking to hire, folks who are have offerings. So if it's related to the topics of this group, you're welcome to share and promote those. Just use good discretion and judgment for what's relevant and what's an appropriate level of promotion. And then lastly, just want to underscore for everyone the disclaimer that this is not while many of us who are contributing and participating in this community are Microsoft employees, this is not a Microsoft group. This is a community group, and so any information or views that are shared reflect those of the individuals in their individual capacity, not any position of Microsoft or as employees of Microsoft. So please just keep that in mind, and that goes as well for anyone else and the organizations that they may be representing. If you're a federal employee, you're here in your personal capacity and only your personal capacity. So for anyone who is new to the Teams platform, just want very quickly to help orient yourself. There's a lot of content out that can help, but if we have this moderated, so if you have a question or want to be able to come off mute, please, either put the question in the chat or utilize the raise hand button here, and then when it's appropriate, one of the moderators can allow you to unmute. Additionally, if you need any other options, such as changing your audio settings or turning off video if you're having performance information, or if you need to dial in, those can be accessed through the three little dots. We care very much about accessibility, so the recording should have a transcript associated with it. I've turned on the auto translate feature, but if you, for whatever reason, while you're participating, experience anything that's not working for you and you need some accommodations or something adjusted, please reach out to me so that we can ensure that we work with you and do a better job, because we definitely want to actively include everyone regardless of what works best for you. So, and then the last two things before I turn it over to Andy is we definitely are looking, while we have a few speakers who are scheduled for the next few weeks, we're very interested in having both customer, community members, industry partners, even other folks who may work in other areas of technology or government. So please use this form. We'll share this again at the end. But if you're interested in doing a talk, it could be a 15-minute presentation about something you've done, or a project that you're very proud of, or even something, a facilitated discussion. Please submit that, and we'll work with you to get that scheduled, because this is really intended to be driven, and of what people in the community are doing, what they're interested in. Additionally, we certainly, feedback is very important. Feedback is a gift. So we have a feedback form. Sharing it now, we'll share it again, the link for anyone at the end of the presentation, and I'll leave this up just for a minute. So please definitely share your feedback about the presentation you see tonight, both for the speakers' benefit, so they can continue to improve as speakers and presenters, although I do know personally that they're already pretty good, but any adjustments, as well as so that as we organize future events, we can make sure to target it and also find the right fit for the people who are participating in this community. So definitely please share your feedback, and if anyone wants the link, we'll also be posting it in the meetup as well. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to my one of my co-contributors, Andy Oak. So Andy, take it away. Thank you.
Nick, thank you. It's fantastic to be here with everyone tonight. We're very excited about this, obviously, and just want to explain that my focus here is to promote the group internally and externally. I am the marketing director for Planet Technologies, and in that role here as an organizer, I want to assist in growing the group to the benefit of the community and enhance the experience for its members in any way I can. Please, as Nick stated, don't hesitate to connect on LinkedIn and social media and contact me. For everyone here tonight, you'll be receiving a charter member badge. You can see it here in the slide. I've used it in my email signature. Use it in social media posts as they relate to the group. As you can see, we've also started the hashtag Microsoft 365 Meetup. So feel free to use that when you're in the chat, live tweeting, all the stuff that you have come to know and do in today's world of social media, connecting and getting that word out between each other. You can also use the badge to promote and recruit new members, whatever you like, really. As a special thank you to our speakers, we will send this special challenge coin as a small token of our appreciation for their time, information, and commitment to the group. I'm also here to assist with networking and connecting people and making sure that ideas are heard and brought to the table, again, to enhance the experience for our members and to promote the community. So let's all connect and stay in touch. I mean that very sincerely. It's fantastic to have everyone here at this first event. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Andrew Kagan.
All right, thank you, Andy. Give me just one quick second to share my presentation. Okay, I'm Yet another core contributor to this awesome group, Andrew Kagan, as the CTO of Planet Technologies. I feel a couple of roles related to what we'll be discussing as part of this community, such as technology strategist and cloud architect. I've been working with Microsoft platforms, specifically Microsoft 365 and Azure, pretty much since their inception. I hope that people remember BPOS, for example. I'm Azure Solutions Architect and a security engineer, and also have a number of other security-related certifications that are general and kind of industry-related. I've been doing information technology-related stuff for 30 plus years and seen pretty much everything from mainframes with punch cards to cloud computing with Microsoft, Azure being one of the examples, but ML, AI, all of those great things. I typically don't like empty labels, such as digital transformation and organizational change management, because often there is very little behind it, but I did put it on the slide and I wanted to briefly explain why. I think that change, generally speaking, is inevitable. And throughout the history of humankind, technology always been kind of a catalyst and accelerator of that change. So I'm interested in the subject of using technology as a catalyst to enact this organizational change to make our organizations better and more efficient. And I have included on this slide a few books that I have recently read that influenced my line of thinking. So we definitely want to incorporate some of those technological changes to be more like Amazon maybe, or to create an exponentially growing organization. But also let's not forget that once again, some things are basic, grow or die, right? I mean, growth and change are inevitable. And also, I wanted to bring your attention to one of the books I've included here, The Challenge of Computer Utility. It really shook me to the core because when I looked at when it was published in 1966. And yet when you read it, you see a description of what's going on right now in the industry. There are definitely examples of cloud computing, though it's called computer utility there. So very interesting stuff. I encourage you to explore further. In addition to introducing myself, I also wanted to do a broad introduction to the subject matter we're going to be discussing today, and our esteemed guest speakers will be diving much deeper, of course. But I just wanted to mention that I hope all of you have noticed that security landscape is changing. It's been changing for quite some time. And we observe some shifts towards, slightly different, more modern, security approaches. I just wanted to, as I said, briefly mention a few of those things. I think the landscape, security landscape is changing mostly due to a couple of things. The proliferation of cloud computing and online services, and also the fact that all of us are much more mobile nowadays. Not only in terms of where we reside geographically and move around, but also in that we use mobile devices that are always with us. We're always getting information. We're always contributing information to the big cloud. And that is certainly a shift from a more static world of yesterday. And also, with that, we need to be aware that, like any organization, we're all constrained by things such as, budgets and access to skilled, resources, skilled labor. Meanwhile, we're under constant, attacks by, bad actors at the same time. So it's hard to balance those things. And I think we need to focus on the basics, such as governance, risk management, and compliance, for example. We need to determine what our highest valued resources and assets are and apply the right levels of protection, to them. So what about this change? Well, the change is from more of a kind of segmentation-based and static protection of yesterday to more dynamic, more behavioral, and more continuous protection of today. So, I have observed that a couple of architectures are gaining a lot of steam. You've probably seen the same. Zero Trust and SASE, or Secure Access Service Edge, is pretty much everywhere you look. Probably for a good reason. Those are sound methodologies. Zero Trust was kind of pioneered and popularized by Google. Beyond Trust Company. SASE is something that was a term that was coined by Gartner. And since then, it actually gained some traction and popularity. So while there are all those new things going on, we should not forget about things like technical debt. Many of our organizations or like government agencies, for example, have a lot of legacy systems that rarely jive with our modern approaches. So there are some challenges there. And there is also, a need to kind of balance some of those agile and nimble approaches with an enterprise perspective. In the agile community, we often talk about how we want to experiment quickly, fail quickly, move on. Sometimes in enterprise environments, especially when things like national security, is concerned, failing is just not an option. So we need to be kind of aware of that and, try to reconcile those things. Well, the challenges may be new, but I think the remedies are kind of, old and new combined. And it's important to know that there are no silver bullets. Otherwise, we would probably not be getting together and having this conversation. Everybody would just buy one or implement one and be done with it. So the novel approaches, they don't change the fundamentals. You still need to have strong security processes. You need to have a competent workforce. You need to have all the basics in place, and then you supplement them with those newer technologies, infuse them with behavioral things that are derived from machine learning and artificial intelligence, and that just adds a totally new dimension to your protection. And of course, you apply a lot of automation, or what we nowadays call hyper automation. So all of this is done to enhance some basic security functions and processes. In NIST nomenclature, those are identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovering to risk events. I have highlighted here detect, respond, recover because I think that identifying and protecting from well-known risks have been not maybe always well implemented, but understood for quite some time. Well, now we're moving more towards kind of a proactive, and active detection, respond, and recovery. We understand that we need to be prepared for zero-day and other attacks that cannot be identified and protected from ahead of time. So we need to assume, assume breach mentality, right? You assume that at some point in time you will be breached. How will you quickly detect that breach? How you will respond to stop it, and how you will recover from it? Those are the most important things. And I think those new approaches I mentioned, Zero Trust, SASE, they can help. I think that automation is super key in all of this because, quickly detecting, responding, and recovering from risk-related events can only be done through automation. Humans are just simply too slow to react to that. So, we need to combine those old time-tested approaches with some new approaches, create defense in depth, strategies. And that's, I believe, where the proper measures of protection lie. I don't want to really dwell on this. I created this slide. I will obviously be making this presentation available afterwards. Anybody who can or want to look through this. These are just some of the industry buzzwords and what they mean. Two things I wanted to kind of focus on separately, the Zero Trust and SASE. Because I think they go actually beyond just industry terms. Those are, pretty well established at this point in time, either frameworks or methodologies. They're very popular. They are available now from industry leaders that can be made practical. And anybody who is interested in taking their security to the next level should definitely investigate those. That is basically all I have. At this point in time, I would very much like to introduce our esteemed guest speakers from Microsoft, Steve Faehl, who is Microsoft US Security CTO, and Mark Simos, who is Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect. Guys, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. So my name is Mark Simos, lead cybersecurity architect at Microsoft. Spend a lot of my days thinking about what life could and does look like, or does and could, I guess, starting with the present and projecting in the future for, everyone from CISOs down to security practitioners and all the sort of directors, managers, team leads, technical leads in between, and kind of what are the most important things that they need to be successful, and kind of helping guide and make sure that that Microsoft puts that guidance out for our customers. So Steve?
Thanks, Mark. Steve Faehl, Microsoft US Security Field CTO. I get to work with many of our wonderful partners and customers and lots of our internal teams to ensure that Microsoft's approach to security is pragmatic. So love getting feedback on what's working, what isn't working. Get to work internally with strategy teams, great folks like Mark that's on the call with me here, to determine how can Microsoft help. And so there's some things that we put together here as, we're looking at recent cybersecurity attacks across the landscape to really say, what is it that we can take away? What is it that we can learn? And so instead of over pivoting on one particular aspect, we're getting a lot of questions about Solorigate, for instance, or we get a lot of questions about ransomware attacks in some verticals. How can we look a little bit broader to say, what are the learnings? What do we need to take away to prepare for what's next? So thanks for joining us today. I'll turn it back to Mark, and we'll jump right in.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. And so, as Steve mentioned, we wanted to really frame this out in terms of what are the takeaways, what are the things that we should be thinking about? Because this is the beginning of the user group. It's a really good opportunity to take a moment and take a big picture view before zooming in on the powerful, compelling things that the community will offer and share with each other. And the way that we see the security threats are really kind of a continuum in some ways. So you have this leading edge. Solorigate is a great example of that. And, not, 24 months ago, I think it was NotPetya. I can't even remember. The history blurs together. The dates are hard to remember. And you have all these different kind of big events where there's sort of front end, leading edge, sophisticated attackers that are doing the things that we sort of always knew were possible, but no one had ever weaponized them and made them available. And so we're seeing this constant innovation. It releases at a kind of a months and years type of cadence in most cases, or we find out about it long after the operation unfortunately has initiated in some cases. But ultimately, this is sort of the leading edge, the stuff where they're doing the hard research on the attacker side, the R&D. And we're seeing some trends there, like that supply chain thing. We saw a little bit of it with NotPetya. We saw it extend with Solorigate as well. So this is definitely something that's going to be making its way into the mainstream, or something we expect will be making its way into the mainstream of attacks. And we're seeing these kind of challenges. We're seeing a lot of different things and techniques that are coming there. Notably there is that they're really trying to evade those the defenses that the defenders are using. So things like IOCs that are reliable and durable and translate across customers, across organizations, across attacks. In this case, because stealth was the priority, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. Evading those kind of common defense mechanisms was a top priority because they wanted to stay off the radar. But the advanced techniques don't stay there, or they don't stay there forever. They do get commoditized at some point. We do see this dynamic where the things we see in the sophisticated attacks sooner or later filter down, and we'll talk about that specifically in the ransomware case in a little bit, into commodity, and they become something that is used at scale, maybe by kind of the run-of-the-mill malware, maybe by the ransomware, or in the latest ransomware evolution, which we'll be talking about quite a bit, in the sort of human-operated ransomware realm. And so we're seeing that sort of progression from leading edge to scale. And then ultimately, just one last thing there on the very bottom is we do see sort of an interplay between them, and sometimes it's buying and selling stuff, and sometimes to masquerade and to pretend that they're low-grade stuff, we see the sophisticated attackers actually using commodity kits, sometimes a little bit of customization, so they look like something that's lower priority, even though it is a more sophisticated attacker at the keyboard. So that's sort of one of the interesting challenges, is that these things aren't completely isolated, but there is a general migration trend from sophisticated to scale it. The analogy I'd like to use on this is the leading edge stuff tends to be very sophisticated, very advanced, very quiet, kind of like, a new electric vehicle or a Tesla or something like that. Whereas by the time it gets down and gets commoditized to the cheapest, easiest, fastest way, it's a little bit more like one of those things you see in a Mad Max thing where they kind of cobble together like 6 different car parts and are, rolling down the road in this thing that, okay, it does the same thing, but it doesn't quite look exactly like the sophisticated version. But that's effectively what we see is that migration, and like the comments that were made earlier around that sort of modernization is urgent, and that need to sort of think about security through that lens of digital transformation, because at Microsoft, we're, generally tend to talk more about zero trust, but we have many of the capabilities that would be found in a SASE portfolio. It's not something we've claimed yet, but either way, however you want to frame it, whether you're looking at through that lens or that lens, it's roughly the same amount of stuff. Getting to take on those principles and those approaches and doing that modern approach we found is super critical. To have that assumption of breach that is, we're going to assume that we're going to be attacked, that we're going to lose, some of these devices, some of these accounts, etc. We have a plan around that. We have a plan to deal with them. We have a plan to detect it. We have a plan to prevent it. We have a plan to deal with what they can do with the next stage of it, and just constantly bringing that assumption of breach throughout all the things we do. The explicit verification is one very, very critical part that really stems from that assumption is you can't implicitly trust anything. We were all used to saying it's on the internal network, it's on, this net, it's on that net. That doesn't make it safe. That means it's on a network that's generally better protected, but that doesn't mean it's a safe network. You have to assume that something could get on there, and you have to do explicit verification. Is this device at a high integrity level by checking the device, not what network it's on? Is this user at a good level of sophistication, not by virtue of the directory it's in, but we check the account, we check the verification, they're using MFA, and they didn't show up on the threat intelligence scans, and their behavior fits the pattern of the last 12 times they logged in. Same location, same timing, etc. So, really kind of looking at that, and of course that concept of least privilege as well. So this modernizing that approach, again, some of these ideas are timeless. So, they were addressed in some of those books that were discussed earlier, but really applying these and doing that rigorously is super critical because the attackers are just constantly getting better from that sort of front-end R&D and then the commoditization. Steve, anything to add to that?
Sure. I'll detour just for 1 second to say apparently some folks are having trouble with the chat. So if you have questions, if you have comments, we're going to have a Q&A portion at the end. But if you have something pressing, do use the raise hand feature, and we will be utilizing that later on. Just as a housekeeping item. In response to this great slide, as we look at human-operated campaigns, Mark and I have been working, very closely on both Solorigate attacks. I think we also did some things on NotPetya. We've looked at the ransomware trends, and really the commonality of human-operated is that within these attacks that we're seeing, these sophisticated attacks are really sort of blazing the trails on what are effective attack strategies, and then we see them, taken at scale with then community improvement and feedback, and then even the sophisticated attackers are using those tools. But this human-operated element is really where we see the challenge now. And so those best practices, it may seem like a cyber espionage, intrusion and a ransomware intrusion have nothing in common. But the more we break it down and the more we look at it, these human-operated best practices are really underlying both. And so it makes a lot of sense to look at them together, and it gives you a better view into risk mitigation and into the threat landscape. Because if you over pivot to specifically one type of attack and the IOCs for that attack, these IOCs aren't durable. The attackers just change them. They're inexpensive to change, and they're doing that to throw us off the scent. So, ransomware initially, was loud, it was noisy, and it had limited effectiveness as a result. If you look at initial stealth activities, ransomware operators are now doing reconnaissance, finding out what organization they're in, finding those crown jewels, finding backups and removing the backups. And it increases their effectiveness, it increases their payout. So, super important to think about these things holistically. As we look at those similarities of human-operated campaigns, and we sort of put them together on the chart here, we see that they're going to have a lot of commonalities. I think when we compared the kill chains between recent Solorigate attacks and recent ransomware attacks, we saw 80% overlap in the techniques used. And really that's because of that human attack operator element. These attackers have flexibility. Mark has a great graphic that he put together about an attacker wandering through a maze to get to the outcome, the desired outcome. And I love that idea, because so many times as defenders, we think about the kill chain as something that is set in stone, something that's an attacker path that they're always going to take. But really, these attackers are opportunistic, and they're going to follow whatever path leads them to the outcome. Where we see the split is human-operated ransomware is really focused on effectiveness. How do I get in and out quickly and not compromise the operation and get my payout as quickly as possible, as large as possible, and really reduce that dwell time. Conversely, when you look at human-operated cyber espionage, and there are many examples out there, that focus on stealth really means that the attacker is willing to spend more in order to have more sophisticated attack patterns. A lot of times that looks like longer dwell patterns. So the question is, how long do you retain your logs? And can the attacker wait till that day +1 to then take the next step in the investigation? If so, there's no way to correlate that activity over time. As we work, through with customers on incident response, the number one thing that I hear is, "Oh, I wish I had logs from back then." So, a comprehensive log auditing program with retention. If you believe that nation state attacks are something you're going to face, and we've seen the percentage of attacks rising there, you need to keep logs longer, because the attackers have a lot to gain by moving slowly and increasing their dwell time.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is quite stark. I mean, the technical techniques that they use are either similar or identical between these, many times more similar than identical. But when you look at what they're trying to do, ransomware is going to try and get a payout, and it takes them anywhere between roughly 3 days and 2 weeks, give or take, to be able to get in there, steal the data, encrypt it, and then demand payment. Whereas an espionage campaign may sit quietly for a month and a half to evade detection, so that the initial entry point event does not get correlated a month and a half later with the next stage in the attack, and it just sits there dormant. And so these are really different profiles, although they're using very similar techniques. They show up differently.
That's a great point. I think one of the big differentiators that you'll see between these attacks in the TTPs is that on the espionage side, they're very concerned with cleanup. Can we cover our tracks? On the ransomware side, not so much. They're about to encrypt everything in the environment, so they're not too concerned with cleanup. So that is something that can help you differentiate when you do see these attack patterns. Is this adversary focused on cleanup operations? Things like dumping logs, mutating timestamps, things like that are all indications that you may be dealing with cyber espionage.
Yeah, and the one oddity there is, if you see security tools being turned off, that tends to be something that's a little bit more associated with like a ransomware commodity, because oftentimes they need the security tools turned off in order to run the encryption at scale. And so that's sort of if you see that, brace, because it's about to hit, because that's one of the last things that they do. But it tends to be associated with that. But sometimes it does happen in the cyber espionage, again, depending on the group preferences, campaign, et cetera.
That's a great point, Mark. And really, as a flag and just a checkpoint for many SOCs, it's, are you monitoring your security tools, telemetry, right? Do you know when telemetry drops off? That's something that we've built into our Defender tool, Defender for Endpoint. Not only resilience in being somewhat tamper-proof and tamper-proofing that implementation, but also great telemetry where Defender for Endpoint instances will be able to showcase back to the service when telemetry has stopped. And so that is something when you're dealing with either a sophisticated actor or a well-known attack path that is human operated, that's something that you're going to see as a flag. Definitely worth asking the question in your SOC, is that something we monitor for? If our security tools were turned off, would we know?
Yeah, it's kind of the cyber equivalent of, hey, the guy that's doing the rounds around the base didn't check in on time.
It's a great analogy. As we take a look at the objective, in this case, of course, very different objectives. You've got the mission-centric objective for the nation-state actors. You don't always know what that objective is. They'll selectively target critical assets and information. And in this case, in order to uncover those objectives, tools like advanced audit to be able to say what search queries are being run, which accounts are being targeted, are really helpful to gain threat intelligence that you can harvest yourself to say, what type of adversary am I dealing with? How do I know what is being targeted? It really gets down to that behavioral analytics. And that's something that's incredibly useful in that case.
Just add one point there. The one quote unquote nice thing about being targeted by these folks is they tend to have consistent objectives year over year over year. So the thing that they went after last time is probably similar to the thing that they're going to go after this time. So from that perspective, you have at least some sense of it. If you've been targeted by a sophisticated attacker, they usually have about the same mission year over year because of that length and patience. Doesn't mean that you're magically going to catch them immediately next time, but it does give you some insight into what they're actually looking for, so you can think about prioritizing your defenses.
And also consider that sophisticated attackers, the first targets that they're going to have are probably the security team. So definitely shore up your defenses, ensure that everyone on your security team is using multi-factor authentication, have privileged identity management, strong audit trails around anything like that that's taking place. The attackers are going to go, for their most likely source of discovery and compromise and go after that as well. As we look on the profit objective side, obviously for ransomware, they're selling access back to the rightful owner, or at times, sometimes there will be an extortion element where they will try to sell it back to someone else. And we've seen maybe we'll call it a double dipping campaign, where they sell your information back to you, but then they also make you pay that they don't give it to someone else. So ransomware sometimes is covering exfiltration. Ransomware sometimes happens in coordination with exfiltration. But they're really targeting any critical asset, whereas the cyber espionage is much more selective. And so finally, on the defender strategy, minimize that dwell time with rapid detection and removal, as Andrew was talking about earlier, but then also flexibility, right? So understand, just because we stopped one threat vector, just because our EDR did something, or just because we had an identity alert, doesn't mean that you've stopped the attack. It doesn't mean that the attacker isn't trying different things. Cyber espionage is much more persistent than the human-operated ransomware. Ransomware, they will go and they will hunt elsewhere for softer targets. When it comes to cyber espionage, they're pretty persistent. So, a well-rounded defense strategy and defense in depth are really key, and that's why Zero Trust is such a great concept to pivot to, because it's holistic thinking. When Microsoft thinks across the 6 pillars of Zero Trust, we're not stuck on just endpoint or just identity. It's really about bringing those elements together. And then finally, that attacker cost: deter, slow the attackers, gain intelligence about the attackers, increase their friction of attack, and that's really the name of the game.
Yeah, and the one piece of good news is, as ugly as SolarGate was and is, the one piece of good news is that particular operation probably took months, if not years, to set up and prepare and do. And all that work, once they were detected, now has to be reset. And in order to sort of regain the next, get to the same position they were at, they have to spend a lot of money, do new research, new ways of being stealthy. So even though it seems like we're not making progress when we have such a devastating attack like this, there is hope in that, we're able to push and drive back. And so, even if the cost is in terms of time of investment, and they can't get to that same point for the strategy, we can actually have, a deterrence or a slowing effect on the attackers, even in those scenarios. But that's universal across both sort of that commodity ransomware human operated world, as well as that sort of espionage data theft set of objectives as well.
When we talk about practical things is there a question? I think there's a question. Nick, if you want to give Christopher a chance to come off mute.
Yep. Hey, Chris, feel free to unmute and ask your question. Chris, you there? You should be able to hit unmute now.
Hey, there we go. One of the things that I come up with quite a bit is not only conditional access policies, but also device compliance policies. So when we look at the SolarWinds conundrum, and we take Microsoft tools, how would you guys take and position yourself to prevent against future attacks?
That's a great question. We have a couple of takeaways. Some of them we're going to position throughout this presentation. There's also a slide toward the end that I'll draw your attention to that is about protecting cloud and Microsoft 365 from on-premises attacks. And so, as we look at SolarWinds and as we look at those elements, it's really a little bit less about the entry point. As much as we want to talk about supply chain, and supply chain's interesting, the attackers use supply chain for a mechanism of broad access, right? They use other methods as well. When you look at advanced, sophisticated attackers, they have a big toolkit. And so they're going to find a way in. The question is, what do you do next? One of those things you can do is hardening that path from on-premises to the cloud to ensure that on-premises compromise doesn't lead to cloud compromise. So we definitely have some best practices around that we'll share in a little bit. There's also a great webinar coming up from our M365 team, and I'm happy to share that link after the session, where they're going to cover specifically how would you hunt for these types of campaigns with M365, and what are across protect, detect, and respond. What are the various elements that you have at your disposal as a Microsoft customer? So we'll address it broadly here, but they have some really targeted advice they're going to give on that webinar that I'd highly recommend.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. And as a segue for a partial answer to what you just asked, we have attack surface reduction. And so Mark has done a fantastic job here mapping out these various rules to human operated methods. And so if you look down the right-hand side, you see the various MITRE attack mappings on this particular Doppelpaymer attack chain. So this was a piece of ransomware. This kill chain is very, very similar to others that we see, both on the cyber espionage as well as on the ransomware front. And when you look at what attack surface reduction can do for you, it can really intercept and inject itself in a lot of these steps throughout the kill chain. And so as you look at a strong identity policy with LAPS and MFA and RDP lockout policies, that really is that first step in the chain of initial access from a MITRE tactic perspective. And as we look at moving down the chain, ASR really has capabilities at most of these levels. And we haven't even ventured into EDR land, right? So we're not into detect and respond. This is just prevent. And so having some well-crafted ASR rules can really help you block lateral movement, can help with credential theft, really across the kill chain. These are, sort of the gold standard in prevent that you can configure inside of your environment.
Yeah, highly recommend taking a look at these. A couple of them require some, configuration, a little bit of context and knowledge about your apps and exceptions. But there's a number of them that are fairly low-hanging fruit, fairly straightforward, and put them in there, and you'll end up blocking a lot of attacks without having to sort of burden the SOC with dealing with the aftermath. So very good stuff here.
And you can still gather all of the intelligence centrally. So, fantastic to do the prevent, but then let's get the telemetry as well. And with what we talked about before, it's really important to be focused as we look at the detect and respond elements, focus on the quality of the alerts that are coming through. And one way to do that is with behavioral analytics and threat intelligence. So obviously Microsoft has a very robust threat intelligence program. We have our Mystic team, which is our Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center. And with that Mystic team, we track not only tactics of nation states, but we also track infrastructure of nation states as well, right? So when you look at a particular attack, Microsoft can partner with you to take a look across the rest of the landscape and say, are these things that you're seeing, are they indicative of nation state attacks? And we have a notification system set up that if we see a nation state targeting one of our customers, our threat intelligence team will engage with you directly and will work to bring that particular issue to resolution. And so threat intelligence is absolutely key, and it's not just IOCs, right? Remember, these are sophisticated actors. When you're hit with a new ransomware campaign, there's a level of sophistication there. The IOCs aren't known yet. By the time it's commodity, much better known. But in those initial instances, that 0-day window, threat intelligence is absolutely essential to tell you what you're dealing with. And then on top of that, behavioral analytics, because instead of having a single pane of glass that is completely crowded with too many things, if we look at all of the possible combinations of this ransomware diagram on the top right-hand side, RDP brute force, weak application settings, if we combined all of those different steps in the chain that these various ransomware attacks utilized, it would be a huge list and it would be very static. So then the next actor comes along, uses a different list and completely bypasses all the detections that are in place. Having behavioral analytics shows you when these particular kill chains that are unknown and non-explicit are in use, and gives you timely alerts based on a multitude of activities, not just a single activity, single alert mapping. This
And
applies
this
to identity
really,
as well.
and this really goes to that flexibility that we pointed out in the last one, is the attackers are flexible and they'll use any of 2 or 3 or 4 different tools to get to an objective. And so you have to be able to essentially cover that. And the way that you structure your defense isn't the same as the way the attacker structures their attack. And so you do have to maintain flexibility to accommodate that.
Great point. And that was really an endpoint example that we have there in the top right, but the exact same thing applies to identity. So looking at Solorigate, a number of identity attack methods used by that threat actor. We see the orange paths in this one were the paths that were most often used. But there are a lot of other arrows on that graph. There were blue arrows saying the adversary pivoted for some reason, took another path. Maybe it was around particular defenses in place. Maybe it had to do with a certain level of hardening. Maybe it has to do with different objective for that environment. Whatever the case may be, the attackers have many different paths. And so the days of sort of hard coding IOCs, hard coding kill chains, it's just not going to work. We have to take things to the next level with behavioral analytics. It looks like we have a question from Shane.
All right. Shane, you should be able to.
Hey, yeah, this is Shane. Thanks for taking my question. Hey, I was just curious. I was just talking to a customer today about automated investigation and remediation, and they really love it. They depend on it a lot. I was just curious for like attacks like Solorigate. How long does it take to like work that into the AI for AIR? Like, does it, have you worked that in yet so that it would be part of the, automated investigations remediation, or is that still being handled by like the threat experts on a case-by-case basis?
That's a great question. So we actually have multiple models, right? So at each layer, we stack the models that we utilize. Some of them update more quickly. Some of them are longer term. Our threat intelligence is something that is updated in, I'll call it near real time. So as we uncover particular attacks, as we uncover different attack vectors, that threat intelligence updates automatically to leverage what is already in the models, right? So the models provide a part of the story, they provide the context. The threat intelligence provides that real-time pivoting that we're able to share broadly across our entire customer base as we learn about particular attacks. When you look at some of the other models and our probabilistic kill chains, which we'll talk about in a minute, those are much more explicit additions. And so once a kill chain is well known, you'll find, and has been verified by humans on our side, you'll see it get added proactively to those probabilistic kill chains, which then increase efficiency and increase likelihood for similar scenarios in the future. So there's that real-time targeting of what is all of the fuzz and all of the noise around a particular attack pattern, and we can fuzzy match that pretty well with some fast-acting models and TI. But then there's the longer-term, what do future attacks that are designed like this look like? And those are updated in our probabilistic kill chains, which are curated by our threat intelligence teams.
Okay, so with Solorigate, I mean, it's probably where I imagine it wasn't shown up before because somebody would have probably seen it sooner, but it would show up now.
So we have proactive detection. We announced we're doing that even just at the Defender AV level. And so when you think about attacks that are happening, EDR is one level of investigation. Antivirus is like the first bar. It's the first bar for entry there. And we pushed out that threat intelligence to go into block mode even at the Defender antivirus. So you can think about as we hone those models, all of the different products that exist within Microsoft will update to take advantage of them. So that's one of the benefits of the entire ecosystem is that we can push that way. So as far as at an IOC level, there were IOCs that we could detect from the outset based on like we see here in this ransomware attack. As a campaign, to be able to package it up nicely and say this is the entire campaign, that takes some human review to be able to package that up nicely for your SOC.
And so some of that's out, some of that's being refined. It's kind of we're releasing it as soon as it's ready kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's always iterative, right?
Yeah. All right. So maybe people would have already been seeing some of the indicators individually, but might not have been able to see the whole big picture together.
And as investigations, go on and we interact with more customers and see more activity from more threat actors and those types of things, really the scope and the quality of those detections just continues to increase. So we partner, not only with our customers but also with others in the industry, providing threat intelligence, providing insights from investigations that we've had. And so we not only mature our own products as we continue first-party investigations, but we also help other security companies mature theirs as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you may imagine, Solorigate was a very high priority for us, so that definitely jumped to the front of the line for any work related to it.
Yep. And I believe it looked like Cynthia had her hand up. Cynthia, you should be unmuted if you want to ask your question.
No, my question was answered in the later parts of that discussion. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Great.
And so the moral to the story is behavioral analytics, right? So as we look at, this is a particular measurement based on the Microsoft environment where I talked about those probabilistic kill chains. Those probabilistic kill chains are non-exact matches. So how do we find an attack that hasn't been created yet, right? That hasn't been discovered yet? And that's where this behavioral analytics comes in. And so here's an example that we were running based on our telemetry, tens of billions of network incidents and anomalies that were detected, tens of millions of identity detections, tens of millions of mailbox detections, and millions of endpoint detections. And then going down from there and using our probabilistic kill chains, we were able to take it down to triple-digit incident candidates. And so we're able to filter and look and say, is this a possible incident? We can then look at subgraphs and do machine learning to prioritize those. And it turned out to be double-digit incidents. And so when you look at our effectiveness, gleaning what is changing within the threat landscape, where are these attacks coming from, and it's not an exact match of a kill chain, it's probabilistic. And so that's where we get even more reach. We can find more things than we even know about firsthand. And this is just a great example of what is available to your SOC. Instead of looking through millions of events, billions of events, can you get those curated high fidelity incidents that really tell you where to look? And the more tools you have enabled, like advanced audit, like identity protection, all of those factor in. Even looking at something like our insider risk management. Insider risk management is a type of behavioral analytics. And so if it's very applicable for insiders, also very applicable behavioral analytics for sophisticated actors. So just a great thing to keep in mind is IOCs are great, exact matches are great, but we need to think beyond that in order to get in front of these advanced attacks.
Yeah, because ultimately at the end of the day, the real constraining factor on the right is the human mind. The carbon-based processors can only handle so many things before they get burned out, before they get tired, before they get demoralized, and they hope that some other SOC has a better job for them. So we got to be very, very respectful and cognizant that we want to put the best quality stuff we can in front of those humans so that they're spending time on the mission that they signed up for and love and are passionate about, not on a whole bunch of false positives. And so that's really the key, is to provide that quality. And one of our other best practices is having a proactive threat hunting, even if it's a single person part-time combing through. Hey, if these don't make, in our case, we recommend 90% true positive. If they don't make the 90% true positive bar, because they tend to be noisy, maybe there's good stuff in them, but they tend to be noisy. Let's have someone check those once a day or once a week in a proactive manner so that you don't have to process every single one of them. And so we've learned that that's actually kind of a key component in the process as well. Not only this technology that helps get you as clean as possible, but for that next set down of a little bit lower fidelity, that's a great place to start a hunting program. And it gives you also that earned sense of safety that we're not going to miss something because it didn't come in from a high quality alert. And so all these things kind of work together. So we wanted to zoom in a little bit on the ransomware piece, because this is something that's been trending over the last, I can't remember exactly, I think it's 18 to 24 months now, that has been really evolving into something of that is severely impactful to a lot of organizations. And Solorigate did offer a lot of important lessons learned and insights that are, helping make all of our best practices and technologies collectively as a community better. But at the same time, there is this commodity for-profit model, and we don't want to forget about that and lose track of it, because they have been really growing, and we'll talk about that. So the modern age of ransomware really started with CryptoLocker. It was, there was versions of ransomware and extortion, cyber extortion before that, but the mass deployment of, I'm going to encrypt your hard drive and make you pay for the key, usually for Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, that really kicked off with a bang, starting with CryptoLocker. It was very much the first of that generation. And the business models evolved fairly quickly, a lot of experimentation, but that's been with us since around 2013 or so. The generation of human-operated ransomware really got its roots and inspiration in the WannaCrypt and NotPetya events. So WannaCrypt took the idea of, I'm going to encrypt your hard drive, attached it to the, I think it was called Eternal Blue vulnerability, packaged that up and made it into a worm. Which may have actually been an attempt at ransomware. I don't think anyone ever got the money out of the Bitcoin wallet, honestly, but it really brought a whole new scale to that. And then NotPetya, just about a year later, roughly, introduced this, added to that wormability by adding the Mimikatz toolkit to it, so that it wasn't just that one vulnerability exploit. It was actually also doing credential theft in an automated manner. And it was really masquerading as ransomware, right? Because it didn't even save the key that someone could pay for. So it was kind of a little bit of a fog over it, but it didn't last very long of pretending to be ransomware. It was really a destructive attack. But nevertheless, that really served as, in many ways, an inspiration to the attackers for this generation that we're experiencing now, that's been going on since about, I think the earliest reports we're hearing, we found, are somewhere around March to June, roughly, of 2019, which puts us, sometime approaching the 2-year point, where the attackers started actually putting an attack operator onto this, not just someone to respond to paying the Bitcoin and negotiating and doing support for how to get Bitcoin, but actually someone that would be doing an attack operator mechanism, running the Mimikatz and other tools in the toolkit. And so that's really when that generation of human-operated ransomware started, and it's been growing and maturing in sort of this spectrum ever since. And so that's the one that we worry about a lot, because it takes some of those techniques that were pioneered in that sophisticated espionage, APT, whatever you want to call it, the higher end of the spectrum, and really democratize them and commoditize them into a business model, into the ransomware business model. And the thing that we're seeing here, and this is what concerns us, is not just what's happened so far, but the trajectory that it's on and the lack of obstacles to growth. So if we take a look at kind of what happened, you have this initial start of commodity. It's one particular pure commodity. So one computer is being used to send spam mail or whatever it is. It's just a pure commodity scale play from an attacker's perspective. And then you have this targeted data theft, or usually for the purposes of espionage, sometimes corporate, oftentimes nation state, that really brought in the Mimikatz. And if you've been around long enough, the Windows credential editor and past the hash toolkit, for those of us that have been doing it for too long, and really changed one computer to, hey, we can do this across an organization, and we don't have to just target one computer at a time. And along comes in 2013 CryptoLocker and introduces this, hey, we don't have to find someone to buy this data. We don't have to find a way to make money off their bandwidth or their data or their computing power, by generating cryptocurrencies, et cetera. We can actually sell access back to that original rightful owner. And that really introduced that on kind of a per machine basis. And over time, we started to see, hey, we'll do group discounts because we got 100 computers, 200 computers in this particular company before they got stopped. And so let's go ahead and give them a group discount. It's not one Bitcoin per, we'll let you do it for 5 for the whole thing. And that sort of started that along. The thing that concerns us about the combination of these two is it's sort of like And, forgive the crudeness of this. It's like strapping a nuclear bomb to like a U-2 bomber. You used to have range, but all you did was take pictures. You used to have damage, but you couldn't deliver it. But when you strap the payload to the distance, all of a sudden it becomes a whole different operation. And so that's the whole different set of impact, even though there wasn't any, quote, new technology. And so this combination of things is very, very concerning because it has a huge impact on organizations. And don't think of it as exactly like a NotPetya or WannaCrypt, because those were automated and it would encrypt everything, including domain controllers, et cetera, et cetera. What this does is this is the attackers choosing what to encrypt, and they're going to let you run as an organization just enough so that you have the ability to communicate and pay, but not so much that you can actually keep going with your business operations. So it tends to be somewhere in that range, and this combination is something that concerns us greatly, and it's very, very damaging to organizations that get hit. And then looking forward beyond that, okay, so this is what the attacks do. The profit on this is quite high. The demands are in the tens of millions, sometimes for some customers, 50,000 all the way up to 10, 20, 30 million are the demands. Of course, it's often negotiated, but still, it's a heck of a negotiating starting point from the attacker's point of view. And all of that money that they get paid funds two things. One, profit, which they take home and of course pay themselves with, but two, it also goes into their R&D for the next one, and they can continue learning and buying different things, etc. And so we see that profit is continuing to fuel each next generation of things. And just to be clear, Microsoft's recommendation, just about most folks in industry, unless it is absolutely unavoidable for loss of life or other reasons, don't pay. And the more that you pay, the more that the attackers are doing it. Now, we know that doesn't magically solve all things, and that there are very, very difficult situations, and that these are difficult decisions. But the default that should be very difficult to budge off of is not to pay. And the thing that concerns us, as you look at sort of what is the sort of headroom for this to grow, we've all got IT environments that were built, anywhere up to 50 years ago, right? And security was only a top priority, maybe 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 weeks, 5 years ago. It's only been a top priority for a limited amount of time, and the rest of that, 45 some years, security has been not important, and productivity and getting things out quickly and all the other priorities took priority over security. And what that means is we have this massive, to use, I think it was Andrew's language earlier, technical debt that's piled up. All those decisions were made without security as a consideration. They got baked in the infrastructure and layered and layered and layered on top of each other. So we're all sitting on this pile of technical debt of, hey, security wasn't important when we designed this. And so that gives the attackers a very, very rich set of targets to go after, because who's perfect 100% at applying every single security update? Who's got every security configuration locked down tight for every operating system, every application, et cetera? Who has every application that followed secure development lifecycle processes and made sure they were threat modeled and evaluated and applied those and static and dynamic analysis? None of these environments are perfect. And so the attackers have a very rich opportunity space and a profit model to take advantage of that. And so this combination of factors is really concerning for us, and it's the reason why we focus not just on the sophisticated attacks, which are super important, but on these commodity pieces, which have a lot of things that work today, and then they have the opportunity to commoditize the stuff that the sophisticated attackers are doing. So this combination is something that concerns us greatly, and it's something we really want to see folks take action on.
And we're going to discuss some of the mitigation. I think one of the things that would be very concerning as well is, as we've seen the popularization of supply chain attack now, multiple times in multiple featured incidents. We saw how WannaCrypt and NotPetya really led to these human-operated ransomware campaigns, and they took inspiration from that. We also have concerns about supply chain now being a proven methodology for intrusion, and what that could mean for these, human operated and commodity ransomware in the future as well. So not to paint a doom and gloom picture, but it's definitely something to be aware of and something to prioritize. And the good news is, when we look at these attack patterns, when we look at the mitigations, really the mitigations are the same. Whether it's cyber espionage, whether it's ransomware, the solution is the same. So as you pursue that security modernization, you're achieving benefit across the board.
Yep. So just taking a look at these attacks, very similar kill chains to the ones that y'all are probably very familiar with. Again, the focus is on cheap and easy and available. The leading contender at the time that these things matured up into this is, hey, RDP password spray. So that tends to be something that people associate with it. It is something we did see in a lot of kill chains, but again, the attackers are very flexible on it. The one thing in here that I do want to call out as a note is that one with the little red $sign there. And this is the one that really broke my heart when I heard about it, because it just went to one of the few things that we had that was an efficiency. The attackers have started to figure out, as they have these commodity presence in various different environments, from low-grade malware and this and that, which when you're faced with a whole bunch of nation-state stuff, that always falls to the bottom of the priority list. Well, those folks that have presence in those environments have started to wake up to that fact, and they're starting to resell that on the dark markets to these attacker gangs and groups, and effectively say, hey, you want access to xyz.gov or .com or whatever. We've got access, pay me 10 grand, 25 grand, $25,000 or whatever it is. And then the ransomware gangs buy that, and then they go do their attack, and they return for tens, hundreds of thousands, or sometimes millions. And so they've actually monetized that existing low-grade malware that is very, very difficult to eradicate 100%. And so the SOCs that have been ignoring this for efficiency reasons are now facing the prospect that any one of those could pop. Something that happened 2 months ago, 3 months ago, that was commodity, and it just never made it to the top of the queue, all of a sudden got resold, and then you see a completely different set of actors doing a completely different set of things that go into a ransomware attack. And so this is, one of the things that concerns us about this is it isn't just they're going in and earning their way in, they're also buying their way in. So
when you think about that in comparison to supply chain, this is a legitimate login. It's not very different than legitimate binaries running. So you have signed binaries that you trust. You have an admin account that you trust signing into a box. The adversary has a foothold in the environment at that point. The question is, do you have the zero trust architecture to support you after that point? You assume breach. Where does the attacker go from there? And that's a question that we really need to double down on now.
Absolutely. So then the traverse and spread looks, for no surprising reason, almost exactly like the APT attacks of credential theft, own a box, credential theft, add to the key ring all the creds that are on there, try them out, got another host, got another service, grab the creds from there, and just building that key ring until you get to admin access, typically domain admin, enterprise admin type equivalents within the environment. And so once they have that is when they sort of get in on that executing the objectives. Things we typically see in these attacks is first they steal the data. It's not always clear how much they get. It varies by individual organization, but they do enough to convince them that they're ready to threaten the client. And then they also kick off an encryption and lock up the data, because ultimately at the end of the day, this is an extortion play, because ransomware is a form of extortion, not disclosing your sensitive files to the dark web, not reselling them, is another form of extortion. And so, essentially the extortion kicks in after they've done enough prep. Like I said, typically what we see is anywhere between 72 hours and 2 weeks for them to conduct these operations. Tend to be fast, tend to be noisy, kind of like one of those out-of-tune diesel engines you'd see on a Mad Max show. It just gets the job done. It's not pretty, it's not elegant, but it gets the job done.
That was 2 Mad Max references in the same presentation. I think that's a record.
I think I need to go watch one of those movies again. I don't know. I'm just feeling the Mad Max thing.
You got to get it out of your system, man. Yeah, totally understand that. The good news is with that decreased dwell time here, when they establish persistence, you can often uncover it, right? So as opposed to the cyber espionage, where they're going to have those long dwell times and maybe pushing the limits of logging. Here in this case, the persistence is generally established within a fairly short time frame of when the ransomware attack is launched.
Yep. The bad news being that they're intelligent, adaptable humans that are experienced at multiple environments. The good news being is they're humans and they still type at a limited rate. They do have scripts and automation, but it is all fundamentally a human-driven thing. So on the defensive side, and we are going to give you a link to where you can download this deck with all the information in it. So don't feel bad that you can't actually read all of these. We put together a mitigation plan, and so this is out there. It's public. It's available. You're one of the first folks that are seeing sort of a presentation on it. And this is what we recommend to deal with this. Because of the flexibility of these attackers, this is actually pretty close to a general security modernization plan at a technical level. Because of the level of concern we have, we actually put a lot more specificity into this than we normally have in guidance in times past. We kind of did our best to burn out every bit of "it depends," or "you could think about," or "you could consider." We tried to get rid of as much of that language as possible and focus on, use the backup plan here, focus on giving you a fully baked OKR-oriented plan. Objective at the top, the desired outcome that you should be focused on, in this case for secure backup. The bottom, the measurement of mean time to recovery, it meets your BCDR goal. The time frame that we recommended in there, and a place for you to put in your own dates, a place for your team. Ideally and typically what we see at most organizations is the sponsorship in this particular case comes from the CIO. Project leadership is driven by the infrastructure team, and here's the other folks that you need to have on board with the checklist of what to do and why, to sort of help the stakeholders understand why this is an important thing to do. This is a fairly new format. We've been sort of evolving it to this state. Love to have your feedback on, hey, is this the right thing to do? It would help if I had this. We really want to help get organizations kickstarted on this modernization and get this done. Super, super important for people to take this on so that they're not in that situation where they have to make those difficult decisions of to pay or not to pay. We don't want people in that position. We want people ahead of that. The reason I'm showing you backup is it is the first thing that we do recommend. And all the way from making sure the stuff is backed up, and then that you can actually restore it, along with protecting the backups, because there's two kinds of ways of protecting it: MFA or PIN, out of band. Unless you have this out of band mechanism, an online admin cannot erase the backups, cannot encrypt the backups. So that's built into Azure Backup, and then there's also immutable storage in Azure that allows you to have storage that you simply cannot, even with an out-of-band authorization, you cannot erase, because it's immutable for usually financial regulatory purposes is the main original purpose of this. But it serves very well for the ransomware scenario that essentially none can delete, no one can do it. None shall pass. There's a Monty Python reference to blend it up.
That's a great call out too, because if you can delete your backups, so can the adversary that's impersonating you. Right. So that's just something super important to keep in mind. It doesn't matter if there's one person in the organization that can delete the backups. That's who the threat actors will go after. Right. So and also, if you think about it from a cyber espionage perspective, backups are a great target for read access as well. So if you think about not only the immutability for ransomware and recovery, but also the ability to restrict read, you have privileged identity management that can have barriers to where you can have dynamic ACLs to say, not only can no one delete these, no one can read them except by escalation in a certain scenario. And there's lots of pull the fire alarm type procedures in place to ensure that happens. You really need to protect against both scenarios, and backups are a great place to start.
Yep, and we'll show this at the end, but backups are always the first stage. Data protection tends to be right there up with it. We found that the cloud tends to be more resilient to these attacks because it has automatic copies that go back. There's a lot more things built in than in most typical on-prem enterprise stacks. And then the next priority after that is kind of working back from the kill chain with a privilege access strategy, protecting those admins. We recently released just before Christmas a comprehensive zero trust based guidance on how to protect your admins as well as your enterprise users and make sure that the device meets standard before it gets access to these things through conditional access policy enforcement, that the user account does, that all of the intermediaries that you're using are configured at that high level. Intermediaries being like a VPN or a PIM-PAM solution or an app proxy solution like a Azure AD App Proxy Zscaler. So having all of those, having that entire complete strategy as well as implementation for it. We worked very hard over November, December to get that out. And so that is actually out there published click by click, step by step in all the different models. So as much as possible, we want to enable folks to take action and address these issues. So Steve, we're starting to run a little bit low on time, so I'll have you cover this one and then we'll close it up.
Yeah, I'll do this very quickly. And a couple of things I'll underscore based on Mark's comments there. It's that, if we can emphasize it is a holistic strategy, right? So when you think about zero trust, if your approach to zero trust is network only, you're still giving the adversary plenty of room to run. If it's identity only, you're still giving the adversary plenty of room to run. If you think about hardening the cloud against external adversaries, you're missing the on-premises element. If you're thinking about hardening on-premises only, you're missing the cloud element and all of the data that's out there and the operations that are based there. So it is that holistic strategy. And so one of the things that we're getting really prescriptive about in the light of Solorigate is how to protect cloud and Microsoft 365 from on-premises attacks. This is something that a lot of organizations, it wasn't on their radar. Best practices around securing privileged access are amazing. And as Mark said, we just put out new ones. We highly recommend that you do that. Take a look at this diagram as well, just from the standpoint of, if I'm using cloud to recover for my ransomware scenario, I need to make sure that the cloud stays in a state where it's recoverable. If we look at attackers coming in a cyber espionage standpoint, they may start on premises, but they're going to try to get to the cloud to get to high value assets there. And so really in both cases, securing cloud from on-premises attacks is really valuable for recovery and operational resiliency. So just a couple of things to call out on this. The first thing is you should not have accounts with cloud privilege in your on-premises AD. So when you look at those accounts, be it service principals, be it administrators, really isolate and wall off that privileged access to something that is cloud only. And so those admin accounts, be it for Microsoft 365, for other cloud applications, if they are created in the cloud, and if the authentication is completely Azure AD, that removes attack paths that were used in Solorigate, such as SAML token compromise, minting new SAML tokens, compromising that identity chain. You don't have to defend against your admin accounts in that same way. You have a smaller surface area. There's less opportunity. We look at the same thing when it comes to build pipelines for software. I get questions from customers. How do I secure my build chains against supply chain attacks? If you're utilizing Azure DevOps and those PaaS services for build, they're much easier to secure because they have a much smaller footprint. And so those dedicated cloud admin accounts, of course, secured with that guidance that Mark mentioned, with the securing privileged access guidance, and manage those devices and have dedicated devices that can be signed in from, again, for those administrative accounts. We got a question earlier about conditional access. When you're looking at conditional access, having that secure workstation is part of the equation, the secure identity, and really doing that risk evaluation across all of the attributes of the assets.
Yep. So just to wrap up and give a little bit of time for questions. Ultimately, not only are the stakes changing from sort of an espionage perspective, but the ability of this massive impact and massive privilege, and what the ransomware actors can do with that, and the business model to profit off of it really are changing the game. We don't really see an end in sight for either the espionage or the extortion ransomware models. So we're expecting continued growth, continued evolution of this. The good news is that there are some weaknesses, particularly on the ransomware piece. that you can go after taking the backup option away. Because if you have a backup option, you can restore from backup, ironically with probably about the same amount of work as decrypting all these different things, which is not fun after you get the key if you do have to pay. You can be back in business and back on the mission and back in operation. And so that one's a super critical one. And then that privileged access where they take, essentially one device, one account, one piece of commodity malware that they're trying to grow from, and being able to contain that and prevent it from getting into that privileged access realm. Those are the top two priorities. So really, focusing on those two. And then, everything else kind of varies by organization. That's why we have all the different plans there. But ultimately, the things that are cheapest and easiest to them and the things that are cheapest and easiest for you to defend against should be the top of your list amongst the rest of that sort of those elements. But that's the key lessons that we've learned from these human operated attacks, both flavors of it. So I think we are ready to take any last questions that y'all have.
Yep. Mark, Steve, this has been great, and thank you so much for presenting. Let's see if anyone has any questions. Please use the raise hand feature, and we will get you unmuted. And happy to take that, and even if there are a question about the community in general, not specifically the presentation, but please start raising hands for anyone who has. And I will also put up, while we take questions, the speaker feedback form slides. So if anyone has to run, just grab the link, use the QR code, because we definitely would love your feedback, both to give Mark and Steve something to share for their professional development as well as future sessions. So, looks like we got a question from Matthew. So Matthew, you should be able to unmute.
Hello. Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. This is a really great in-depth look at best practices and what we should be doing with I guess we're calling it SolarGate. We saw just the methods that the attackers use to get into supply chain to then furthermore get into, government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and so forth, and getting signals, information from them. Did you all internally at Microsoft, with your supply chain stuff, with what we're using to update Windows and servers and our software as customers, was it a gut check for you all? Were there changes, or was it really just a matter of, hey, let's get a report on how we have everything set up and make sure that we are above board and doing things how we should?
So I could take that one, Mark, if you want.
Go for it.
Okay. So I will clarify first by saying, we can't comment on internal investigations, but I can say that the security development lifecycle that Microsoft started down the path of creating that in 2002, trustworthy computing has been top of mind for us ever since then. So absolutely, we are, aware of supply chain mechanisms and, focus heavily on it. We employ red teams to try those types of techniques and anything else they can think of against us internally. And we really use those as our gut check. So do we look at trends? Do we look at particular attacks and do our own internal assessments? Absolutely. But we're not waiting for attacks to happen to make these top of mind and to take action on our processes. We have continuous security improvement internally, and those processes are extremely robust. And of course, we can't tell the future, but we definitely look around corners.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You guys gave a great presentation tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jim, you're unmuted.
Thank you so much. I would echo the last comment that this was an extraordinary presentation, very informative, and I really appreciate it. I know we're recording this, and this is more a logistics question, but where do we go to find the recording? This is certainly something that pieces of I'd like to revisit.
Yep, once we get the transcription done, we're going to take the recording as well as any of the links that Steve and Mark want to share that they mentioned from their presentation. We will get those posted within the meetup group. So if you go to the event description, or we should also put them in the forums, and that will link you to wherever they're going to be posted to access them. So just go back to the meetup group. Hopefully we'll have all of that up by tomorrow morning. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Questions for Mark or Steve? Questions about the group or general comments? Certainly, it doesn't even have to be a question. Could just be something that you'd like to share as a member of the community. Lieutenant Commander, floor is yours.
Hey, thanks. So my question for you guys is, you talk about the two methodologies as if they're, I guess, always separate, and I guess to date they have been separate between the ransomware and the espionage side of it. My past life, I played on submarines, and of course think of the nuclear strategic deterrent. And so I guess my mind goes to, what if those two intersect and you have a nation state that starts to take the ransomware type methodologies but embed them with the low and slow, like they've done with espionage, and turn it into, I guess, who needs nukes if you have a country the ability to wipe an entire country or their government, everybody on this call, that entire sector off and hold them ransom through espionage ways, or through low and slow. Is that, I guess, what's the likelihood of that with current TTPs, or how many years out do you think that would be technically feasible?
So I'm going to be very careful not to over speculate here. So the key is all of this is just technology bits and bytes, right? And if the mission is to do that, I would classify it under the cyber espionage, because it's about a mission in a nation state, taking action. It's very likely. I don't know whatever the final attribution was on NotPetya. I can't recall if we officially took a position. It's been a couple of years, but that had all the hallmarks of having been a nation state operation that used quote unquote ransomware techniques. So effectively, that's already visited us in some form, and so the reality is it's technically possible. On the bad news side, the good news is if you do all the right defensive mechanisms, and a lot of them apply to both scenarios and both kill chains equally well. And so that's sort of the good news in it, is if we do the hygiene right. And focus on that and prioritize that, and work with the business partners so that or mission partners, so that it's not just security complaining and whining. It's actually, hey, listen, this is software maintenance, this is cost of doing business. The same way that we change the oils in the trucks. This is part of what you have to do. You have to patch these things. It's what you need to do to software, because it breaks down if you don't, right? And it happens to break down when the attacker chooses, as opposed to breaking down when it goes after so many miles. But ultimately, all of those things that you would do to get this fixed for either case are going to help the other case. And so from that perspective, as a defender, the kind of investments you make, it doesn't matter. Now, it matters from the mission impact perspective. But what we have to do as defenders, as folks that are using these tools and working as security professionals, it doesn't really change our call to action, if that makes sense.
And I'll just add to that, Mark, that we absolutely see it more often in the reverse, where ransomware is covering up for espionage. So while we're talking about it in two distinct categories, those are the realms in which the operators generally operate. But there are historical instances of them combining in both ways. cyber espionage to launch ransomware and ransomware to cover for cyber espionage. So definitely worth considering.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else with a question? If not, take a final call, and if not, then we will close out here in just a minute. So any other questions, please raise your hand, and happy to make sure you get a chance to ask them.
Okay, guys, this is Andy chiming in here. Just wondering if folks can still see me. Nick messaged me lost power. I don't know if that's because we've got some storms and some winter weather. Steve, I still see you moving around, right? You're still live.
I'm still here. I thought Nick was just freezing very convincingly there.
Just very still. He was just so mesmerized. It really was. I mean, fantastic. I learned so much and appreciate the contributions of everybody. Nick and Andrew and myself are going to put together the presentations and the feedback and continue to foster this community. As Nick was saying earlier, we're doing this every other week, and we've got a couple coming up. We've got an identity topic coming up in February 3rd. I think I heard Nick click back on, and then we've got an M365 after that in February. The dates aren't right in front of me this second, but you can see that on the meetup group that we'll be doing those two things: identity, securing identities in the cloud, and Microsoft 365. You've got it. Now what? Which is always a big topic. You get all these toys, you get all these bells and whistles, and so often there's features in there that we don't realize or know how to fully develop ourselves, and we're going to have experts speaking on that. Nick, are you back, buddy?
Yep, I'm back. I guess the ice storm that's coming through the mid-Atlantic flickered the power here out in Western Loudon. So
that's exactly what I said. I did want one more thing before I jump off. Is it Mark? I so appreciate the Mad Max. Like, that is my era. That is what I grew up with, the originals, and I was so not disappointed with the remake with Charlize Theron that I just enjoyed all of those analogies, and it really brought some perspective. So I appreciate both of you and the information and time and as I say, commitment to the group is so greatly appreciated. Nick, I'll turn it back to you, buddy.
Yeah, no, I think we're wrapping up. It looked like somebody raised their hand, so if you're able to unmute them for anyone else to add in. But at this point, we can pretty much close out. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Big thank you to Mark and Steve for coming and presenting. Always a pleasure to hear you guys speak. And we'll be sending everyone who attended, as well as you guys, your presenter badges. So you can display them proudly on your social media if you want.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Nick. Great event.